Welcome back to the Real Perspectives podcast, everybody. I'm your co-host, Vladimir Bosanac, co-founder and publisher of the Registry. I'm joined today by my co-host, David Saxe, managing principal of Calvera Partners, also here in the Bay Area. David, how are you?
Great. Thanks for having me back on. It's great to talk with you about the real estate market today.
Absolutely. Where do we find you today? Where are you?
I am here. Well, it's not lovely today, but I'm here in usually lovely Sausalito over the Golden Gate Bridge in Marin.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, similar weather here in South Bay in Silicon Valley, but at least we can enjoy a little bit of this, reprieve before the really hot days come around, right? So
yes.
Not too shabby. David, a couple of things we're going to talk about here today. Probably the biggest impact, I think, on the region here that everyone, is well aware of is the incoming IPOs or the impending IPOs of two AI companies that will really sort of transform not just technology, but I think many aspects of industry, including commercial real estate. And we wanted to touch a little bit upon that and give a perspective on what we think, might be some interesting discussion points around how that might impact multifamily, which is kind of your space, right? Tell me, how do you feel about this?
Oh, yes, this is the hot topic everywhere in the Bay Area. For those not based here, I'm sure you hear some of this, but it's all we talk about out here and read about. And there's a lot of people that have differing opinions across the board on this subject. But, to set the baseline here, we've got the IPO, of SpaceX, the upcoming IPOs of OpenAI and Anthropic. Everyone has probably read, because it was a national, if not international, story about after the SpaceX IPO, Elon Musk is now the first trillionaire. And there's a handful of folks that have been along the ride with him that are newly minted billionaires and a stable of other folks. You also have the IPOs coming up of those other two AI companies that I mentioned. This looks different, though, than the .com boom. And I'm from the Bay Area. I remember that well. I happened to be working for Sam Zell Equity Office when that boomed and then crashed, which is another topic altogether. What's different about this one, and it's really fascinating, is it's not going to be it's going to be concentrated in the hands of fewer people. So, and it's funny that I mentioned this, or not funny, depending on your take. Instead of thousands of newly minted millionaires, many of whom I may know, you're going to have hundreds. So the wealth from these folks that they're going to accumulate, and it's on paper until they are able to sell, is much greater for a smaller number of people. Or put another way, there is a huge concentration of wealth at the top. And we can get into what does that mean for the real estate market, obviously society. There's all types of folks with different opinions.
Yeah, and I want to touch upon that a little bit, but I think if we could quickly go back to maybe your experience with Sam's organization earlier on, right? I mean, the impact that technology had on this region was profound. It helped make it bigger and grew faster, all of that kind of stuff. What was your experience in terms of like how it impacted multifamily specifically, and maybe residential in general? I mean, obviously the prices in this region. The only time I've seen anything go down was during the great financial crisis, and I think they only went down on average by maybe 20-25%. Quickly rebounded within 18 months, and we haven't looked back since 07, 08, essentially, right? When this occurred. But what did it do during that period for the industry?
Well, I know it very well because my first job in real estate was in actually Equity Office, although I knew about all of his companies, was to project rents, construction, impacts on the economy of the boom and then the bust. And because Zell had such an empire, similar to Blackstone now, they have the data across so many buildings. So they somewhat know what's going on before other folks. The difference here, or what happened back then, but also the difference is everyone can probably remember there was a bunch of companies back then that didn't really have a lot of revenue. And that's the difference this time with these AI companies that do have a lot of revenue. So you saw a huge boom in apartment rents, office rents. You had occupancy, I think, in the apartment side, maybe go to 99%. It was pretty wild. Things went way up, as we know. And then eventually the things got overheated. People realized that there were many companies that do not make any money, where there were massive valuations. And then I specifically remember, and this was on the office side, but it also impacted the other sectors. I remember looking at the rents on Sand Hill Road, at heart of Silicon Valley, where all the venture capital firms are.
Right,
And
which
looking
for
at
our
a
audience
chart.
who don't know the Bay Area, this is sort of the road where most of the venture capitalist firms are located. It is basically like maybe like 3-4 miles long, kind of connects, downtown Palo Alto to like a major highway. If you drove it, you'd think you just were, driving through like a little neighborhood. You'd miss half of the buildings there, essentially.
Yes.
But the world's venture capital wealth sits there on this little road, right?
It's unassuming. The buildings are not that attractive. It's also right near Stanford University. There's reasons why it's there. But back in the day, and this is 25 years ago, Equity Office owned buildings on Sand Hill Road. And because I was in the research department, we also looked at internal data. It blew my mind at a young age to see the fall off in rents on Sand Hill Road. A mind-blowing drop in rents, falling off a cliff to the point where it got so bad that I would be sitting in the room with the executives and they would do what's called buying occupancy of office buildings, which means how far do we have to lower the rents and offer tenant improvements to lease these things back up? Because that was the most important thing to them. So bringing it to today, which is what we were gonna touch on, and as I talked about, there were more, I'll just use the term millionaires, created back then because it was spread out amongst a number of companies, all different types of companies. It wasn't just AI. Whereas today, at least right now, there's the 3 big AI companies, and they only employ however many people, and people joined at different points in time. Now we can get to the fact that that should reverberate and create, but also create other issues. And who knows how long this is gonna last, but at least it's backed by revenue this time.
Yeah, well, all signs point to this is going to last. I mean, I remember back in, I don't know, '09 or something, when Facebook was still based in downtown Palo Alto, and I think they were trying to get people to live closer to the headquarters, essentially. And what they did is they gave everybody a $600 kind of a housing allowance. Well, all that did is all the landlords in Palo Alto raised their rent by $600 because they knew this was happening, and it just made Palo Alto impossibly difficult to live in, and that continues to today. Here we are 2 decades later, essentially, right? I do feel that we're going to experience sort of a similar thing with these IPOs, even though there are fewer numbers of people that will be minted, millionaires or whatever. General salary in the Bay Area is I think we did see some research recently. In IT, like an average salary is $500,000. That's unthinkable, I think, in other parts of the world, even in other parts of the country. And so I do think on the multifamily side, we've already seen rents go up in San Francisco, right, by something like 9 to 11% in the last 20, maybe 12 months or so. I'm sure they're going to continue to grow over the next 12 months. I mean, right, Dave? You have a sense of this as well, right?
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to stop just in San Francisco. It's probably going to expand into the sort of southern counties, so San Mateo County, Santa Clara County. But I think it'll probably expand into Oakland too, which is another kind of interesting sort of topic, right? Because that's probably one of the areas of the Bay Area that hasn't been touched as much, but for all intents and purposes, I expect rents to go up there as well.
Yeah, well, it's funny you mentioned first Palo Alto. That's where I'm from. My parents still live there. I went to Palo Alto High School. I was in high school not to date myself, I was in high school in the mid 90s. So I lived through the transformation of Palo Alto from a sleepy little downtown. I remember the Facebook headquarters there. And now I go back and you've got all the trendy restaurants and the amazing cars and the Stanford students running around. So it is night and day. And then obviously the residential market there is just insane, where people pay $6 million and they're tearing down a 60s house to build a mansion. But to answer your question on the rent side, absolutely. So, as a former research guy, again, the data would show that as San Francisco booms, and my Lord, we're in a boom right now, that should spread around the rest of the Bay Area. In fact, CoStar just projected that multifamily rents in the Bay Area should go up 7%, 6 to 7% this upcoming year. And remember, that's market rate growth.
Right.
So what I want to make the point about is you might have rent-controlled apartments that are much lower baseline rent, and if somebody leaves, that rent could go up. It's called a lease trade out, and we're seeing some in San Francisco upwards of 25%. The new rent versus the old rent is going to be obviously way more than 7%. Now, people may not leave their rent-controlled apartments even as much as they used to for that reason. And then to your point on Oakland, so that was Silicon Valley. There is so much debate on this on Oakland. The numbers would show, to your point, that as San Francisco booms, every single time it eventually spreads to Oakland.
Right.
It's near San Francisco. It's got beautiful weather. You can get to the employers on BART, our public transportation subway system. The difference this time, and I'm not saying it's going to make a difference. If rents go up so much in San Francisco, people have no choice, particularly the non-AI folks, but to move somewhere else. The difference so far is Oakland is so poorly run that is that going to keep people away for longer? And then also the difference so far, although we might be seeing changes here, people may not remember that the last time we boomed in San Francisco, companies started moving offices to Oakland. Uber, I think, bought or built.
Yeah, Uber was going to have a huge sort of East Bay headquarters there, 100%. And they
I haven't read that.
Building.
Yeah, I haven't read that. And in fact, I just saw Clorox, I think, just defaulted on their marquee headquarters in downtown Oakland.
Well, to be fair, the landlord.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Right.
They did. My mistake. But what I meant by that is there's still a lot of distress in Oakland. Right. If you go through Oakland, it's not the greatest looking area, depending on where you are. So to come full circle on what you brought up, I do think there's no other end game other than Oakland goes up. I don't know exactly how long it will take, and it'll be the best neighborhoods first. And the last point I'll make is what ultimately ends up happening from a data standpoint is San Francisco is a big boom and bust city. Right. Ultimately, something busts it. Who knows when? Who knows what it will be? And then Oakland falls off a cliff. So from an investment standpoint, you better time it right.
Yeah, and you're 100% correct. We're here talking about this in June of 26. 18 months ago, there were stories about San Francisco, being kind of the doom loop, hellscape, city. Right, where nothing was functioning, nothing was working, and just within essentially 6 quarters, here we are in a very different sort of setting, right? So for all intents and purposes, I mean, all indicators show that in many ways we're going to see continued rent growth throughout the region. I think we're already experiencing it in Silicon Valley. We're seeing this in other markets too, where AI seems to be prevalent. Obviously, I think the number one, number two markets are here in this region. It seems like Seattle is emerging as kind of interesting AI market. Rents there haven't really slowed at all, which is sort of interesting. I'm seeing similar kind of things happening throughout the West Coast. That could be also tied to supply issue. But with all that in mind, Dave, what do you think happens to development?
Yeah, and I was going to ask you actually about Seattle and Southern California, particularly. You have newsletters that cover those markets, which I read every day, by the way. The construction. So the only way to get out of the cost of living, I mean, it's just supply and demand. I'm an economics major,
Right.
is to build more. And this is why the housing element came into place, where the state is mandating that cities large and small, even in Sausalito, build more housing. In theory, more supply should bring down the rents, and people are capitalizing on the housing element. And even here in Sausalito, a handful of young guys just proposed a 300-unit building in Sausalito, which is unheard of here, and they probably will push it through. I'm a little bit more pessimistic in that there's so much demand in the Bay Area for the reasons that we've talked about. I just don't know, even with all of this legislation, how we can build out of this. And if we can build out of it, I don't think it's going to impact us this cycle, this tech boom. We got to start preparing for the next one and get out of our own way. I mean, I was down visiting my parents for Father's Day over the weekend, and you drive down the main thoroughfare up and down the Bay Area, which is El Camino Real, and you see these old one-story dilapidated stores. And it just screams build housing, but there's issues. People own those. I mean, there's just a lot of things. So development is up. It still should go up, but at the end of the day, we still get in. You can't get out of our own way, and there's still limited land in the Bay Area, which is why rents and housing prices go up as well. I don't know what you're seeing, down by you or in Seattle, in LA, across the board on all of these issues. You started to touch on it.
Yeah, well, San Jose specifically, which is the biggest city in Silicon Valley. I think I saw a report from the mayor's office that, and I think I'm going to butcher these numbers slightly, but something like 30,000 units have been approved, but only the permits have been pulled for less than a third of that. Mm-hmm. So that seems to be an issue. Also, I don't know, if a lot of the people that did receive these permits, if now they're looking for buyers, right? So they go through the process of kind of entitlement, which in some cases is probably the hardest part of getting something done in California. And, will it ever get done? Is there going to be lending for that? I don't know. Maybe they're hoping that, rents continue to, grow so they can kind of build into that market. But we're reaching a point where I think, rents are becoming, truly, very difficult to, even for average families to, support, right? So I don't know. Mm-hmm. I don't know how that's going to work. I am seeing some stories from Southern California, for instance, where there's one city, and it escapes my memory, but now that I'm sort of talking about it, I remember that we covered it recently. So there was a project that the city opposed, and then because of the new legislation that was passed recently in Sacramento, the state is able to fine the city something like $10,000 a month, and then it jumps to $50,000 a month. And I think the city came to the point where they had $8 million of fines that they've accumulated, and finally said, gave the approval for this project to be done, right? Mm-hmm. So I think there is inertia behind that. I think there's a population that also does not want their little cute little beach towns to be impacted either, right? And so I think that will continue to be an issue. But I do hope more gets built, and I do hope that throughout this process that we don't see it as just something that benefits rich folks, but it will benefit other people too, because like you, I also believe that more supply will help with some of the pricing.
And you brought up a couple things that got me thinking. There's a big debate about whether all housing, affordable housing is the way to go. What should be built. You read about the San Francisco pushing or getting done, not pushing through more affordable housing, but that doesn't even make a dent in the need. And affordable housing here can be somebody making $150,000 a year. To your point, I'm of the belief, again, as an economics major, that just build units. So I understand that if the numbers only make sense to build luxury housing for a lot of reasons, just math, eventually down the line, as things get built, that will become affordable housing. We just need more units in the area across the board, and just have to understand that it's hard to get projects out of the ground given all the uncertainty in the market, trying to find debt and equity. It's so hard. And even to make decisions when we try and buy existing product, it's hard to make decisions and project right now. So it is. I'm glad I'm not a politician trying to figure this out.
So let me ask you this also. So in the kind of last couple of cycles that you've seen, and you as an investor also, you've gone outside of the region. So you have seen a kind of the last tech cycle or employment cycle, whatever we want to call it, benefit other parts of the region. I think part of that was also driven by COVID and just people being able to move to other parts of the country and work from there. So it put jobs in different parts geographically. Mm-hmm. Did you see that outside of COVID happen also? Do you suppose that what's happening now, will spur development and kind of will help the multifamily space in other parts of the country?
Well, depending on where you're going with this, a case in point would be Austin. We bought approximately 300 unit project in 2020, right around the pandemic, but everybody started moving. Well, Austin was already popular for the tech sector, sure, but it got lit on fire and just boomed with a lot of folks from here and companies moving there. Elon Musk has moved a lot of his companies to Texas, lower cost of business and other things that make it easier to operate there. Rents just boomed at historic rates. And for the record, we got out before where I'm going next, which is it crashed. I mean, things were trading at 3 caps there. It was just nuts. Well, there was a record amount of new supply because developers in Texas love to just keep building, and there's places to do it. And I'm not joking here, they somewhat in Austin, at least for now, solved the housing crisis and proved the point that if you build a ton of units, rents will go down 20%, which is what they did. I'm finally starting to read that some of this supply might be burning off. Maybe there'll be some upward pressure on Austin rents again. Austin will continue to be a popular place to go. But again, very different than the Bay Area. The same thing we saw happen in Dallas. Record amount of demand still, but in companies moving to these places, but record amount of supply. Yeah. So I continue to think these markets will be popular. People go there for a lot of reasons. And then the final point I'll make is we're now starting to see investors move into the Midwest because it's somewhat a game of musical chairs where rents go up in the Bay Area, then everybody moves to the Sunbelt and rents go up there, and then they got to move to the Midwest. And Midwest, there's attractive places. I used to live in Chicago. So there's just constant movement in the multifamily industry in terms of the rent growth that's happening, I guess.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I would add Seattle to that also, because over the last decade, a lot of units built in Seattle, around Seattle. The Seattle region is essentially sort of, 3-4 counties, but the sort of primary ones are King County, where Seattle and Bellevue are. North is Snohomish County. South is Pierce County. Pierce County is kind of known as kind of an industrial sort of hotbed of the region. But a lot of jobs are there. So multifamily grew in Pierce County tremendously. And then because we're sort of running out of space, similar to the Bay Area and King County around Seattle and Bellevue, you saw a lot of development up north in Snohomish County, so close to Everett, close to towns like Bothell, places like that. Big development projects, 200-300 unit apartment buildings, and then all occupied, right? And so the rents there have not grown as much as they have in the Bay Area, obviously, right? Because there was a lot of supply and people are willing to, move another, 10, 15 minutes north or south or whatever and add to their commute. So
What about in Southern California? I'm fairly certain I've read articles that and Southern California's been struggling. I'm sorry, the LA market's been struggling.
yeah.
Supply was up. There's been downward pressure on rents, and again, it could be because things are not the greatest down there too. But
100%, but I think places where the supply has been constrained. So think about San Diego, Orange County. That's been more difficult. Inland Empire, however, is where we've seen a lot of growth, and rents have done relatively well there. Rents, in a sense, well for the renter, not necessarily for the investors, right? The valuations, I think, in hand have kept, probably, more moderately in the Inland Empire region, and differently so in some of the other parts. But again, I think the issue there, just like in other parts of California, is cost of development, cost of construction, all of these regulations around building, which I think a few of the regulations passed in Sacramento over the last decade have helped. Builder's remedy, as you know, I'm sure Dave, has been a very effective tool to get projects passed. But I think the challenge remains now, like, okay, it's passed. Now we need to get projects going, right? So that continues to be sort of how things are evolving there as well.
yeah, one other thing I'd ask you too, and my intention is not to get political here, but because it's a hot topic, you have different styles of leadership, particularly in Seattle. Well, Seattle now for sure, and LA's in the middle of a fascinating mayoral, although the candidate that was more, needless to say, in San Francisco, we've had a more moderate mayor and things are going well. Seattle, there have been some rumblings. I think there was an op-ed written by Howard Schultz, this former head of Starbucks, about how companies might leave depending on the policies there. So I guess just the general point I'm making is that leadership matters. But at the end of the day, even here in San Francisco, we could have the greatest leadership ever, and I'd argue that we do. But the system is still the system, and it's still going to be hard to get some of these units out of the ground. Now, he can attract companies, though, so that's great for the broader area. But again, as we started with, the more demand for this area, the more tech, rents go up. It's like a double-edged sword. And again, I'll go back to not wanting to be a politician.
Yeah. Well, listen, as a former basketball player, I'm going to not take a lot of into account what Howard Schultz has to say. He sold the Supersonics. Man, that just... that's
I remember.
That's never going to be forgotten or forgiven. No, but joking aside, there's been kind of a confluence of sort of some social policies and legislation passed in the state of Washington, including the ascension of a sort of kind of a socialist mayor there as well. So Mayor Mandami, obviously, we know of him in New York City. At the same time that he became mayor, Katie Wilson became mayor in Seattle, and not as much fanfare about her. Similar kind of narrative. A lot of the kind of business sort of leadership was very worried about what that means for the region, for the city. Seattle has been, like San Francisco, hit very hard during the COVID pandemic, but primarily because it's tech oriented, just like the region here. So a lot of people went to work from home, and the city arguably has not recovered in terms of office occupancy, even though some of the other parts of the region have. Now, some people use that as evidence to point that therefore Seattle is managed more poorly. I don't know. I think it's a big boat. And it's a very little rudder, I think, that the mayor has to command. I think that it's certainly a mayor can put certain things into motion and put that boat in a certain direction that eventually could lead to maybe good things or bad things. I think it's too early to sort of say that that alone has an impact, and whether like one person coming into a system that's already established and working in a certain way can really make that big of an impact. Now, having said that, Mayor Lurie in San Francisco has made quite an impact, right? And I think he's done it very thoughtfully by bringing in the business community, where he was lacking some funding from City Hall. He was able to bring an organization together. I believe the San Francisco Downtown or something like that. I should know this name. But they've raised something like $40 million for their efforts to help in terms of things like beautification and just like stuff that typically a city would do. But I think he's managed to kind of get the the business owners and the property managers to sort of and owners to really sort of step up and say, hey, this is we're all in this together, right? Let's make this happen, right? And it's been revived. Having said that, OpenAI is based in San Francisco, Anthropic is based in San Francisco, so those things help as well, right? You can't just say this one person made it happen.
No.
There were already things in motion, right? So all that to say, I do think that at least in California there seems to be sort of a kind of a little bit of a wind of change in terms of pro development. I think we've had a couple of state senators push for some new legislation. I think the cities are going to have a more difficult time pushing back on development, pushing back on housing, all that kind of stuff, which I think generally is positive. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And like I said, even in a small town of 8,000 folks here, I mean, we're landlocked here in Sausalito and there's hills and things like that. I mean, like I said, somebody just proposed a 300 unit project. So that would have been unheard of.
Yes. But north of you, Dave, right? We're looking at Santa Rosa and Healdsburg, which is up in Sonoma County and further, right? Lots of development, right?
Yeah. Yep. And Marin has a shortage of housing, and you were up a little bit further there in your example. But yeah, the housing is needed, and there is more coming across the board. We'll see how much of a dent it can make. But I agree with you, it'll help. Yeah.
Let me quickly touch base on a couple of things. You are probably very well aware of this, but where are we with, interest rates, lending, the ability to sort of refinance? Tell us how that's impacting the market too.
So I sigh.
Big breath.
Because I sigh. Because, we're in the business of making projections, and developers, we buy existing product. And, between interest rates and just other things, wars on and off, inflation, I mean, I could go down the list, insurance costs. It's just been harder than I remember to make projections that you're, somewhat confident in, except in the short term, I would say. And then add AI and what the hell that's going to do to society, and what the world looks like in even a few years. So to answer your question, I just saw as recently as this morning that the new Fed chair that was supposed to be friendly to what Trump wants, 3 big banks are projecting 2 interest rate increases next year. So from a real estate perspective, everyone was waiting, the lend and extend, for things to get better, for rates to go down. And here we are now thinking, who knows if it now goes back the other direction. So it has implications for loans that were taken out a long time ago on various different pieces of commercial real estate, how long the lenders are willing to work with their borrowers. I've been hearing about lend and extend for years.
Yeah.
Similar to how, so yeah, a little bit all over the board there, but my point is it's just, who knows? And that just makes it hard to make decisions.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that their projections of 2 additional rate increases is not necessarily unfounded. I mean, we just talked about rents going up. Rent is a major component of inflation. Obviously, inflation is what drives interest rates. I mean, those 2 things are combined. We know food costs and expenses are not going down. I just saw a report yesterday that something like beef prices just in the last year have gone up something like 11%. Another projection for the next sort of 12 to 24 months is to go another 10+%. So food continues to go up. Housing is not cheap, regardless of just here in the Bay Area, but just everywhere else. I'm not. Maybe you can tell me. I mean, maybe there are some parts of the country where rents are going down, but maybe they're going down from a peak, and not necessarily going down from, I don't know, the average numbers, right? So does this mean lending will be even more difficult? So get what you can get now.
Yeah.
Is that kind of a crazy question to ask?
Well, to clarify too, I agree with you. So when I said that there's 2 projected rate increases, they're probably warranted. Inflation, oil prices, and all that. So
Right.
so I just was more making the point that people were being too optimistic, hoping that wasn't going to happen. But from a policy perspective, it makes sense. On the lending side, yeah. I think that who knows going forward, and that's what we've learned over the last 5 years, is you think it's going to go one way on something, it can go the other way. So stop waiting, lock it in. And it's not like we're going back, although I just said never say never. It's not like we're going back to 3% interest rates. Could they go back down? Yeah. Would it make a marginal difference on values and the ability to get more loan proceeds? Yes. But is there an equal, if not greater, chance it goes the other way? Potentially.
Yeah. Dave, for developers, does this make the kind of regions in the outer circles of a certain geography more attractive? Is this where the value add opportunities now?
And you're referring to existing or new development?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, what we see based on just past cycles, and it happened the last time here in the Bay Area, is rent boom in the core, and then they kind of work their way out. So development starts happening in the broader East Bay, just outer rings, if that's what you were referring to, because that's where the rent growth is going. And the bigger issue, though, is what happens with the cost of construction and materials, and how confident can you get that your yield once you build on the deal off construction costs is enough to make it worth your while. And we all know from development is the reason why development is supposed to give you bigger returns is because you're taking the risk and things can deliver at the wrong time. So I think people are just being more cautious regardless of the area on development, debt and equity. And that also is a counter to more units being built, because how do you prove out to your big equity source that we are going to deliver in an environment that's going to result in enough demand to support the yield you wanted as an investor?
And a couple of things that are going I would say that they're in favor of what you're doing, but the job market has been pretty resilient. I mean, we haven't really noticed kind of any spike in unemployment, even though every now and then we hear some companies laying off hundreds or whatever. But across the board, it seems to be relatively resilient. Home ownership, I believe, from everything we've seen, is becoming more difficult. So that means folks are probably going to be renting longer, right? Those two things, I would imagine, probably help folks like you in this multifamily space. Is that right?
Yeah, that'd be correct. I mean, we're seeing more and more folks rent of all ages. The cost of home ownership with high interest rates and just the price of real estate out here makes that home ownership dream, unless you're one of these folks that's really crushing it, much harder. Folks are also just younger folks are more alive and aging from their young age into in a market that's just more transient. So you Ubers to get everywhere, self-driving cars, Airbnbs. Who wants a timeshare anymore and be locked into one location? So same with renting. It makes it easier to move. That being said, I don't want to sugarcoat it. the percentage of income, even out here in a highly compensated market that goes to renting, is mind blowing versus other ends of the areas of the country. And at what point do you reach a ceiling? And then that's when we talked about people move to other areas. And that's why folks also started moving into the Sunbelt. But even there, you wonder, even at, let's just say 20% of your income is spent on a rent, what's the ceiling there? And then is that why people now move to the Midwest?
Right.
So yes, it's good for what I do if rents go up, but not for not for society.
And well, yes. And another aspect of that is you have visibility into, construction costs and sort of, some of the issues with materials and labor there as well. What's your perspective on sort of how that will impact the market in the next, 6-12 months?
Yeah, I mean, that has been, I think I just saw some statistics in the last week about how construction costs are up. When you combine that with all the uncertainty we talked about, it doesn't help new development at all. And to also clarify a point that I just made when I said that, my business benefits from rents going up. One point to make there is that, we buy older product that's significantly less expensive than new construction. So we're still leasing to the average blue collar and even lower white collar worker. So technically I'm in the business of, I'll call it affordable housing relative to what the new stuff is getting built. That stuff is also harder to maintain. There's a lot of maintenance issues. So we somewhat need a little bit of the rent growth in order to justify fixing these things up. So just wanted to clarify that point there.
I don't know. Makes sense. All right. Well, David, I think we're at a point of our podcast here when we're going to talk about something we call Microscope telescope. We either zero in on something very, very, detailed, or kind of pan out and, kind of take a broader perspective. Each of us is going to bring one of these topics. So I'll let you start first with yours.
Yeah, this has been in the news in the last week. There was an op-ed in the Chronicle. Back to our point about more housing being beneficial, kind of an interesting thing about how condo development has not been as popular and is at risk of falling off if it hasn't already, due to something called the Right to Repair Act here in California, SB 800. It's pretty interesting. It basically holds developers liable for condo defects a decade after completion. So what does that do? It drives up insurance costs relative to new rentals, developing new rentals. You can get sued, which happens most of the time by the HOA. There's all sorts of things that can be scary to developers. And I live in a building, I'm renting it out, but did live in a building in San Francisco where we are in the middle of this right now. The building developed 10 years ago, and I get emails every day about all the work, and it's substantial, that's going on at what was a very nice new development that the developer is funding. So this has an impact on new supply. All supply is good. And California is trying to push some bills through to help this. We'll see if they pass, but it's something to watch as we, as a society, focus on the desire for condos, which is often the entry point that people have versus really expensive homes to have quote unquote home ownership.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think part of sort of building value and ability to sort of accumulate wealth as a family is you start off with maybe a condo unit, right, and then you sort of graduate into a first family home or something like that, right? It becomes kind of a stepping stone into home ownership, and then I don't know, later in life maybe you go back to a condo when you retire or live kind of closer to the city or something like that, right? Which is very interesting. And at the same time, I noticed something similar. I used to live in Seattle for almost a decade, and we saw over that decade very, very few, maybe a handful of buildings being built in the sort of condo space. Everything else that was built was basically for rental housing, and the ones that were built and sold relatively quickly. One thing that I did notice, and I don't know, David, this was just maybe something particular to Seattle, but most of the condo developers there were from Canada. Which I thought was very interesting.
Same with Mission Bay here. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Same with my condo that I'm renting to an OpenAI and Meta couple. Is in Mission Bay, and most of the product, actually, to your point, I believe was built by a company called Bosa out of Canada,
out of Burnaby, British Columbia, right?
Yeah, I didn't know that was the case in maybe it's the same company in Seattle.
Yeah, maybe it's something that just sort of West Coast kind of related, but anyway, one of those curious things, right? And maybe they sort of specialize in this and they're sort of better at it in Canada. I don't know.
Yeah. So what do you have for us today?
For us, well, the point that I wanted to kind of make, and this comes from an article that we covered recently, but it's about bridge lending, and you're probably better familiar, about bridge loans than I am. But bridge loans are, basically kind of a sort of stopgap measure, if I understand this correctly. If you're, trying to sort of do like a short-term loan that gives you a little bit more time to secure something that's a little more permanent, right, longer term. With better terms and that kind of thing. Given sort of the situation with interest rates and difficulty with refinancing and all of these kinds of things, it's apparently coming out that bridge lending has become now kind of a mainstream, and more landlords are using it as sort of a main kind of funding source. More and more, and we have some numbers here from from a couple of reports about this. But it's impacting kind of how the industry is behaving. There's this whole, wall of maturity in 2026 that apparently something like close to $900 billion worth of debt needs to refinance this year at some point. And so, this has been one of the ways that landlords have been dealing with it. My understanding is bridge lending is going to come with higher interest rates, higher risk. Mm-hmm. Apparently there's some additional flexibility that comes with that as well, but I think the risk maybe overshadows that flexibility. But you've dealt with bridge loans, David. I would love to hear what you think about this as kind of a sort of a trend in the industry.
Well, one of the reasons why folks in real estate got in trouble, and this is just even buying existing multifamily product, was not only were they buying at peak pricing due to low interest rates, but they were putting bridge debt on top of senior loans. And then when everything went down, they couldn't cover their debt anymore. So I tend to operate more on the conservative side, because folks that were in this business decades ago say where you get in trouble is getting out in front of your skis on leverage. So we've typically steered clear of that, which is why, unlike many of competitors, we can afford to wait some of this out and have more conservative debt, even if we bought things at a less than ideal time, even if it's not exactly at the peak. So that's my baseline. Is it's usually too risky. Yeah. That being said, I'd be lying to you if on our latest acquisition, which was 88 units in a nice neighborhood of San Jose. It is interesting. Like, we did get a bridge quote, and that provided, we didn't take it for the reasons that I said, but just so you know why it's appealing, it provided more loan proceeds. It provided, well, that was the main thing. So you can technically juice your leverage return with more loan proceeds. But ultimately, we passed on that and went for a more traditional agency loan because of the risk that you take on. It crushes your cash flow at the higher interest rate. So we just didn't want to take that on. And we thought our investors would like more of the balance between pretty attractive cash flow in Silicon Valley for slightly lower projected return, last point I'll make is flexibility is important in this environment if you can get it, because of all the things we've talked about today. There's so much uncertainty out there that in an ideal world, you don't want to lock yourself in with a massive prepayment penalty if things skyrocket. So I get it. I personally just don't have the risk tolerance. For it.
Well, it's going to be interesting. You know, I think we're definitely challenged. I think in many ways, and it sounds like based on our conversation here that the rest of the year may continue to be somewhat challenging, even more challenging perhaps than where we are today. So you know, stay tuned, folks, and we'll see how this all plays out. Well, David, thanks for joining me again on our podcast. Really great to see you. To our audience, thank you for joining us, and have a great rest of the week.
Thanks.